Paulie Walnuts is one of the few Sopranos characters you can sketch from memory with just a few strokes. The silver wings in his hair, the tracksuit that fits a little too perfectly, the flattened vowels and clipped certainty, always certainty. He's a man who prides himself on being obvious. That's the trick. The more obvious he makes himself, the less you notice the contradictions underneath: generosity and cruelty, piety and superstition, a soldier's discipline and a gossip's impulse control. Old school, he says, and he means it. But what does old school amount to when the world keeps moving and the rules keep changing? This essay paints Paulie in his real colors, not as the comic relief who slips on black ice and argues with delivery guys, but as a blueprint of a certain mafia ideal that's been carried forward a little too far. He is a working definition of loyalty that curdled into survival, a man who believes in fate, signs, and saints because these are the last things that don't lie to him. Watch him closely and you see a theme: everything important to Paulie must be simple, or else it threatens him. And the life around him refuses to stay simple. Paulie's constant refrain, respect for hierarchy, punctual envelopes, clean corners, sounds like tradition, but it works better as armor. He repeats rules because rules protect him from feeling. The job gets done, the envelopes are collected, the kick-ups are correct. Emotions are noise. It's no accident that he jumps from grievance to grievance like stones across a river. The bartender shorted me, the landscaper didn't pay, a guy looked at me wrong. He keeps the conflicts small because small is controllable. And he gets to be the hero of those little wars, which is easier than confronting the larger ones. The armor originates in a biography we glimpse only in fragments: a kid from Newark who learned hard lessons early, then found a system that made sense. In that system, the lines are supposedly bright. There's your boss, there's your capwargime, there's your crew, and if you do what you're told, you'll be fed, feared, and maybe even loved. For a young Paulie, this must have sounded like relief. Structure cancels chaos. The trade-off is soul tax. You don't ask questions about why you're hurting people as long as the rules say the people deserve it. Paulie pays the tax without flinching, but taxes add up. He tells the story of earning, of respect, of the life, as if reciting catechism. What he hides inside the liturgy is simpler and more honest: fear of being out of step, fear of being replaced, fear of a world that doesn't use his language anymore. Whenever the present contradicts his catechism, he doubles down on ritual, crosses himself, makes a visit to a medium, lashes out at some poor store owner over $50. The contradictions are never solved, they're covered by a louder chant. Paulie's beliefs are transactional. God is a currency, stories are receipts, signs are invoices that justify actions he already wants to take. When he sees a psychic or frets over spirits, he's not surrendering to mystery, he's searching for certainty the same way he searches a back room for cash. If a dead guy is supposedly angry, then whatever misfortune hits Paulie acquires a reason, which is better than chaos. Better to think a ghost cursed you than that you made a bad decision. This is why the show's funniest Paulie moments also bend toward menace. Humor arrives as he panics over curses, cats, dreams, or paintings, then fades as you notice what he does when he thinks bad luck needs balancing: he punishes someone. A perceived slight becomes a matter of cosmic justice with Paulie as the instrument. There's an efficiency to it. He can't control metaphysics, but he can control people, and so metaphysics becomes another excuse for control. Critically, superstition also helps him manage guilt. If the world is a ledger and omens are line items, then violence can be booked as necessity. The guy had it coming. The spirits are restless. It's a sign. Paulie's conscience becomes a schedule of payments: keep up with the schedule and you're good, until you're late. Paulie's love language is cash flow. Watch him with envelopes. He counts with a feeler's grace, not just verifying totals but tasting status. He measures love by tribute, respect by points, loyalty by kick-ups. He's not strategic like Tony, he's tactical. A good day for Paulie is a day he pushes 3 or 4 little revenue streams one notch tighter. 500 skimmed here, a grand shook out there, a penalty fee laid onto an overdue debtor. The math is petty in the best sense, it's the math of survival. And it's why he often feels out of place when the conversation turns to real estate flips or big corporate scams. He's a street guy, and the street is where his instincts make sense. Petty math breeds petty morality. Because everything becomes a line item, Paulie develops a miser's ethics: hoard favors, docket slights, and never accept ambiguity. If somebody might be disrespecting you, they are. If a story might be about you, it is. These habits help a collector collect but poison relationships. Friends become accounts receivable. The more insecure Paulie feels, the more he itemizes the people around him. It's funny until it's cruel. This is the hinge that swings between his comedy and his darkness. The same man who complains about paying for a modest gift or who browbeats a waiter can also suffocate an elderly woman because she has cash in her house. The act feels like a grotesque extension of a daily routine, just one more collection that got out of hand. That, Paulie at his starkest, violence not as heat but as bookkeeping. Paulie has ambition only inside a fence. He wants to rise, yes, but not by changing the game. He wants a perfect version of the life he already recognizes, a boss who rewards him, rivals who behave like rivals, earners who stay predictable, rules that stay rules. He's excellent at being a soldier because it's a job with verbs he understands: drive, knock, collect, intimidate, punish, report. Give him a schematic and he won't disappoint you. That's why his relationship with Tony is so durable and so fraught. Tony needs soldiers who think like field captains, flexible, creative, comfortable with modern grift, and Paulie only half qualifies. He improvises under stress, but the improvisation is physical. He chases, he punches, he rips phones out of walls. He can't speak the dialect of the new economy. When the score involves spreadsheets, Paulie looks like an analog device in a Bluetooth world. He hates that feeling and compensates the only way he knows how: find a smaller conflict he can win today. Tony recognizes the value and the limitation. He trusts Paulie to be visible muscle, a reliable collector, a presence that makes storefronts nervous and loyal. But when it's time to cross families, to parse politics with New York, to anticipate a three-move trap, Tony keeps Paulie in the lane. That's not an insult, it's acknowledgement. You don't send a sledgehammer to pick a lock. And yet it eats at Paulie, who confuses being kept in his lane with being kept in a cage. Pine Barrens is often remembered as pure farce, two mobsters lost in the woods, slipping, arguing, nearly freezing. But the episode is also an X-ray of Paulie's psychology when the map disappears. In the city, Paulie's rituals keep him balanced. Out in the snow, nothing answers to ritual. He tries authority first, barking orders at Christopher. He tries blame next, insisting the situation is someone else's fault. He tries prophecy, believing rescue is around the corner because it just has to be. When none of these work, he reverts to the only constant: himself as the center of the story. He becomes bitter, nearly unhinged, and violent. The woods don't care. The humor of the episode works because it's true. Paulie's old-school toolkit is all leverage and local knowledge. The wilderness respects neither. He can't lean on a bodega owner, can't cite tradition, can't scare the trees. The minute he loses his context, he becomes a wind-up soldier who's run down. This is also why the story sticks to him afterward. He never really knows whether he finished the job. Ambiguity is acid to Paulie. He needs certainty to live. The show lets him live with the opposite. Paulie likes to talk. The voice that makes him charming also makes him dangerous. Information for Paulie is a commodity. He sells it to buy status. If he can repeat a story first, he occupies the emotional center of the room for at least a minute. But gossip is a weapon with recoil. The wrong detail aired in the wrong ear can fracture alliances that keep you safe. Paulie knows this in theory. He lectures others about keeping their mouth shut, but can't stop chasing the thrill of being the guy who knows. When he leaks, he usually rationalizes it as strategic positioning. If New York hears something from Paulie, that's not betrayal, that's diplomacy. If Tony hears a rumor via Paulie, that's not gossip, that's loyalty. The trouble is that Paulie's hunger for recognition is louder than his judgment. He pushes information into the network and discovers too late that networks don't forget. Power appreciates discretion. Paulie wants applause. Those two needs collide quietly and then all at once. This is also where his seniority misleads him. He imagines that longevity equals insulation. "I've been around," he says, as if time alive creates a magical margin for error. It doesn't. In a world where men are routinely killed for less than a thoughtless comment, Paulie's habit of chasing validation with his mouth is a structural risk. Tony calculates that risk and keeps him close because closeness means surveillance. It's both affection and containment. Paulie's relationship with his mother is not just backstory, it's the map of his need. He loves the idea of being a good son just as he loves the idea of being a good soldier. Both roles promise something simple: do the right motions and the world reciprocates. When the truth of his parentage shifts beneath him, he reacts not with reflection but with reinforcement: more gifts, more visits, more staged displays of care. The performance is sincere because performance is what he has. He's not introspective, he's procedural. That procedure is built to prevent shame. Paulie needs to feel like a man who takes care of what's his. The nursing home, the errands, the small purchases, these are proof. The underlying emotions remain unexamined because examination risks discovering he isn't the son he thinks he is, isn't the man he thinks he is, and maybe has never been safe. This is why he swings so quickly from sentimental to predatory. When the sentimental program fails to soothe him, he cashes out his feelings the way he cashes out everything else, as money and control. The result is an odd tenderness with a glass edge. He can coo over a family photo and in a different hour break into an old woman's house to stop a rumor that threatens his income. If love threatens his status ledger, the ledger wins. The world will call this hypocrisy, Paulie would call it consistency. A man must take care of business. As the seasons move, you can watch Paulie shrink not physically but narratively. Early on, he's animated by a broad set of appetites: money, respect, camaraderie, ritual, style. Later, he conserves energy. He complains more. He takes fewer risks. His jokes harden. Illness scares him. Omens crowd his sleep. Loyalty becomes a word he uses on others more than a quality he embodies. This isn't moral collapse so much as professional entropy. When the life narrows your choices long enough, you start living by reflex. His promotions are bittersweet. A title without growth is a heavier chain. He gets more responsibility but not more power, more obligations but not more clarity. The young guys speak a slang he can't stand, the old guys remind him of funerals. The police have computers now. The feds have wiretaps that fit inside pens. New York plays chess while North Jersey keeps testing the sturdiness of headlocks. Paulie is furious at all of this and has no language to say so. So he does what he's always done: collects, complains, counts, and waits for signs. The tragedy fits the character. He has no real dream beyond staying exactly himself. But to remain yourself in a world like his, you must evolve your tactics. He can't. He chooses to believe that time is the enemy and yesterday is the solution. The show quietly answers: time is the environment, not the enemy, and yesterday is a memory, not a plan. Ask Paulie about loyalty, and he'll deliver a clean speech. You follow your boss, you don't talk out of school, you never steal from friends, you keep the life clean of certain embarrassments. Then look at his record and you'll see stress fractures. He leaks, he freelances, he goes over someone's head when he thinks it'll pay, and he does ugly small crimes that attract heat. Are these betrayals? In Paulie's math, no, because he never thinks of himself as disloyal. Every breach is a correction. Every trespass is insurance. If he gossips up the ladder, it's because the ladder needs the truth. If he takes from someone near, it's because that person already owed him in some cosmic sense. This is not a cop-out, it's a worldview that has kept him alive. He lives in permanent preemption. The thing that might hurt him tomorrow must be hurt today. Fear and loyalty become the same gesture, hit first. He can be the most steadfast ally in a room when the rules are clear and the target is external, and the most treacherous presence when the room feels uncertain and status is fluid. Put differently, he is loyal to the idea that Paulie should never be the one humiliated. That's not friendship, it's policy. Tony sees through it and accepts it because he values known quantities. With Paulie, you always know where you stand, right beside a man who will throw himself bodily at your enemy and who will, on a wildly different night, sell a version of your business to buy himself one more day of feeling secure. One is not a contradiction of the other, they are phases in the orbit of his fear. People call Paulie funny because he is, and because laughter is the easiest way to metabolize his intensity. He argues with Russians over remote controls, scolds landscapers like a cartoon uncle, tries to stiff the check with shameless theater. It's great television because it expresses a truth. Paulie is an aggressive literalist in a world built on doublespeak. He says the quiet part loud, about taste, about money, about who deserves what, and so he becomes a vent for the audience's unease. We laugh at the blunt tool knocking around a delicate room. But the show never lets the laughter float away. The same bluntness becomes a blunt instrument. The same self-considered honesty becomes cruelty. The same assurance that guys like us have codes becomes authorization to cross lines. Paulie's humor is a flashlight, it shows you where he is, it doesn't soften what he does there. So why do we keep looking at Paulie, season after season, with something like affection? Partly because he's legible. Many Sopranos characters are mirrors that tilt depending on the light. Paulie is a stencil. You know his poses, his beats, his rituals. In a story about uncertainty, Paulie's predictability is paradoxically comforting. He is a reliable barometer of how far the crew has drifted from the way it's supposed to be. When he's calm, the system feels intact. When he's rattled, you can assume the weather changed. He also embodies the costs of the life in a way that isn't symbolic, it's behavioral. Tony intellectualizes those costs in therapy. Christopher performs them in addiction. Silvio formalizes them in policy. Paulie operationalizes them every single day. If Tony is the mind of the family and Silvio the spine, Paulie is the hands, calloused, quick, not always clean. Hands are the first to age, the show lets you see that. And there's one more reason: he's honest about something ugly that others dress up. Paulie is not sophisticated enough to romanticize pain. He may confuse it with justice, he may downgrade it into a thing that had to be done, but he never pretends it's art. He is a small man doing small violence in a small world that thinks it's big. That's the point. The life self-mythologizing collapses when you watch Paulie calculate a shakedown over a few $100s with the intensity of a corporate merger. This is the life stripped of glamour, running on fumes and habit and old stories told loudly. Those lines are clean because the character is cleanly drawn. The show gives him a few explicit inflection points: his crises about family and fate, his illnesses, his brushes with the cosmic, and then watches him return to form. That return isn't laziness, it's the thesis. Some men can only survive by circling their baseline. Evolution would require admitting the baseline is insufficient. Paulie would rather die than admit that. And yet he doesn't die in the show's moral frame, he persists. He persists because systems keep men like Paulie in circulation. He is maintenance personnel for an order that claims to be decaying but never fully collapses. As long as there are envelopes to be counted and doors to be knocked and rumors to be moved from one ear to another, there will be Paulies. They will call it old school, and they will be half right, the other half is denial. Here is the cleanest way to say it. Paulie Gualtieri is the life without metaphors. He believes in its rituals the way a machinist believes in torque settings, because if you don't, the machine breaks and someone gets hurt. He's not a philosopher, not a visionary, not even a particularly cunning criminal. He is a worker whose pride in his work is the moral he tells himself. On good days, that pride looks like loyalty. On bad days, it looks like a crime he commits while insisting he had no choice. Either way, the story keeps moving and Paulie keeps packing the same perimeter, checking the locks, counting the cash, muttering about respect, watching for omens. The hair stays high and silver, the tracksuit stays crisp, the rules stay memorized. And still, under the memorized rules, you catch flickers of a man who once found warmth in belonging and now needs that warmth to keep the dark from closing in. He would never say it like that, he would say handling his business. But watch his eyes when uncertainty enters the room. The old school wants out, the soldier wants orders, the man wants a sign that the story he tells himself still fits. Sometimes, by luck or force, he finds one. Often, he just makes one up and powers through. Paulie is simple because he chooses to be. The choice is both his joke and his tragedy. And it's why, in a universe of characters torn between reinvention and collapse, Paulie Gualtieri stands like a streetlight fixed humming, a little flicker at the edges, illuminating a corner that would otherwise go dark. You know what you're looking at, you know what it does. You know it will be there tomorrow until one day it is. And when it finally goes out, the block is still the block. But for a long time, while it burned, everyone could see the rules. Silvio Dante, the quiet geometry of power. Silvio Dante is the least mysterious mystery in The Sopranos. A man you think you can fully diagram, hair shellacked into architecture, suits cut like a cease and desist, sentences arriving in clipped legalistic rhythms, and yet the longer you watch him, the more you realize that clarity is his greatest disguise. Tony is weather, Paulie is noise, Christopher is combustion, Silvio is climate control. He regulates, he channels pressure, he makes a chaotic enterprise feel like it has a manual. The trick, And it's a devastating one, is that the manual is written to keep a particular kind of man valuable in a world that no longer requires his exact craft. Silvio's genius is to make himself necessary after necessity should have expired. This essay maps the quiet geometry of Silvio's power, how he holds the center without grabbing the spotlight, how he makes policy feel like friendship, how he performs loyalty like a lawyer reads precedent, and how the costs of this posture slowly overtake his body, his sleep, and finally his sense of what a future could be. Every mafia story has its version of the office, the room where smoke becomes signatures and rage becomes rules. For Silvio, the office isn't just a place, it's a doctrine. He treats the back room of the Bada Bing like a chamber of commerce for a criminal jurisdiction, chairs placed as arguments, ashtrays as commas, ledgers as quiet threats. Here he translates Tony's impulses into policy. He's not the source of power, he's its syntax. His method is administrative warfare. He parries chaos with procedure, never saying no outright when he can say let's keep it in-house, never promising victory when he can promise process. You see it when tempers heat. Silvio lowers his voice, names the principle, references a precedent, implies a vote. He doesn't aim to win debates, he aims to recast them. Combat becomes compliance. Fury becomes an agenda item. Men who came to swing leave with homework. This is the most underappreciated form of violence in the show. Tony's violence is spectacle. Paulie's is percussion. Silvio's is paperwork. He moves lines on a page until the room has only one exit, then gestures toward it as if it were the obvious thing all along. People call him the consigliere, which flatters the romance of the role. In practice, he's the chief operating officer of a fragile, high-liability enterprise, and the COO is the one who turns disaster into procedure or else drowns in it. Silvio believes in loyalty the way a contract lawyer believes in clauses, not as a feeling, not as a slogan, but as an enforceable framework. He understands that men tell themselves stories about honor, and he'll let them so long as the stories terminate in obligations he can cite later. You said X, we agreed Y, the envelope is due Friday. He's not cold about it, he's polite. The politeness is not sweetness, it's framing. Make a man feel dignified while binding him to terms, and he'll thank you for the rope. This is what makes Silvio an antidote to both Tony and Paulie. Tony's charisma can blur obligations. Paulie's neediness can cheapen them. Silvio's crispness restores weight. A handshake means something because Silvio will remember it and remind you calmly, specifically, and with a menu of unpleasant alternatives if you forget. When he says, "That's not how we do things," it's less a threat than a return to the document. The life in his telling is not chaos with violence, it's order with consequences. But contracts have carve-outs. Silvio's loyalty is always anchored to the institution's survival first and to individuals second. If protecting the center requires misdirection, he'll shade the truth. If keeping Tony functional requires suppressing a fact or amplifying another, he'll balance the ledger. It's not duplicity, it's trusteeship. He guards the family as an asset whose value he must defend against both external raids and internal corrosion. And he is willing, no, he believes he is obligated, to commit quiet sins to preserve the enterprise that authorizes everyone else's loud ones. Silvio's language is a choreography of refusals dressed as respect. To a man seeking permission, let's slow roll that, eyes are on us. To a man seeking money, we're tight this quarter, come back next week. To a man seeking blood, we'll address it, but let's not make two problems out of one. There's steel in every sentence, but it's wrapped in cloth. The other person leaves feeling heard, which is the second most valuable currency in a criminal enterprise after cash. He accomplishes this through three habits: precision, memory, and selective softness. Precision, he keeps arguments specific, refusing to let a grievance balloon into a philosophy debate. Memory, he recalls who owes what to whom with the accuracy of a forensic accountant. You can't bluff a man who knows your ledger better than you do. Selective softness, he gives tiny, symbolic concessions: a drink on the house, a seat at the table, a line of dialogue that lets a man save face, so the denied request metabolizes as dignity instead of insult. When this fails, the velvet glove comes off. Silvio's threats are lean, almost bored. He doesn't sell them, he files them. It's the difference between a storm cloud and a stamped letter. One might pass, the other is already in the system. Silvio is the show's most consistent performer. He loves impressions, old lounge patter bits that make the table laugh. On the surface, it's comic relief, the club owner doing club owner things. Underneath, it's governance. Laughter sets the tone of a regime. A room that can laugh together at a controlled joke is a room that can accept a controlled message. Silvio uses performance to reset group chemistry after hard news, to smooth transitions between agenda items, to introduce a decision with a smile that makes disagreement feel churlish. You think you watched a bit, you were nudged into consensus. This is not manipulation in the cheap sense. It's ritual, the secular kind. Every institution needs ceremonies to metabolize change. Silvio provides the ceremony. An execution order can't be just a line item. It has to arrive in a rhythm that says this is unfortunate but necessary. A demotion can't be just a headline. It has to be a story about standards. Silvio's little vaudevilles are the oil in the engine. Men who would bristle at a memo accept a punchline that carries a rule. The cost is psychic. Making violence feel normal corrodes the performer first. He must constantly reconcile the laughter with what follows it. You can see it in his eyes when the room finally empties, the mask slips, the corners of his mouth flatten, the posture sags 2 degrees. The show never turns this into melodrama, it just lets you notice that ritual is a weight. Silvio is the rare lieutenant who could be boss and doesn't want it, not because he lacks courage, but because he knows the difference between power and exposure. The boss carries the narrative blame for every contradiction. The underboss can correct for those contradictions without becoming their scapegoat. In corporations, this is the difference between a CEO and a COO. In mob terms, it's the difference between being the symbol men must resent and the mechanism men must obey. He is, however, the natural regent. When Tony is down or absent, Silvio steps in and the temperature drops. Collections continue, politics proceed. The machine hums. He does not need to be adored, only obeyed. His orders are narrower than Tony's. He rarely invents new revenues or gamble with big plays, but they are clean. He reduces the surface area of risk. Yet he also discovers the pain of the big chair, ambiguity that can't be proceduralized. Some choices aren't between right and wrong by the family's codes, but between wrong and wrong. Tony improvises those with gut and appetite. Silvio tries to translate them into rule and precedent. Eventually, even he hits the wall. There's no precedent for this. The stress hits his chest, literally. The body tells the truth that the voice won't. That's not weakness, it's the invoice for years of absorbing everyone else's panic and turning it into steps. Silvio's one flashy talent is cartography, not of streets but of power. He reads maps of obligation across boroughs, who's aligned where, which cousin actually matters, what historical offense can be reopened as leverage, when a compliment is a bribe and when it's a test. He doesn't get seduced by New York's pageantry. He treats their grandeur like another variable to normalize. The point isn't to impress or be impressed, the point is to convert meetings into predictable next states. His technique with external rivals is an X-ray of his internal style. Keep it technical, keep it cool, keep it structured. He strips the emotion from grievances and leaves only the fee schedule. This happened that requires a response. Here are the viable responses ranked by cost. We choose number 2 and call it even. It's not elegant, but elegance is a luxury for peacetime. Silvio's gift is making peace feel cheaper than war to men who are constitutionally tempted by the opposite. When things escalate beyond talk, he doesn't flinch. He's not squeamish, he's sequenced. He treats violence as a step in a process rather than a performance in itself. That's why his presence at grim moments is so chilling. There's no glee, no rhetorical dressing, just execution, moral, procedural, literal. Every leader needs a myth to survive the days when facts would sink him. Silvio is the keeper of Tony's myth. He edits it in real time, shielding Tony from news that would trigger the wrong decision, amplifying compliments that renew his confidence, framing failures as recoverable, and when necessary, being the one who says the hard thing in a way Tony can digest. He's not a sycophant, he's a myth manager. This requires a precision empathy that is not tenderness so much as calibration. Silvio knows Tony's triggers, disrespect, family threats, whispers of weakness. He roots around them when routing is wise and roots through them when confrontation is unavoidable. He will take the blame for delays, absorb the heat from subordinates, and let the myth of Tony's unbroken decisiveness remain intact, because the myth stabilizes revenue, which stabilizes everyone's lives. The moral hazard is obvious: protect a leader long enough and you begin to enable his worst instincts. Silvio knows this and manages it the only way he can, by timing. He picks moments when Tony can hear criticism, then delivers it as if it were a principle Tony himself had long held. It's an elegant con of care. It works until it doesn't, and when it stops working, Silvio's body pays again. The Bada Bing is more than a setting, it's Silvio's instrument. On stage he sets tone. In the office he sets policy. In the hallways he sets gossip flow. He roots who meets whom, who waits outside, who is seen leaving through which door. Information architecture is power. You control what men know, and when they know it, you control their options before they realize they were choosing. But the club also tempts entropy. Pleasure bleeds into business, boundaries smear. Silvio fights that with ritual, scheduled meetings, predictable thresholds, a house style that says, you can misbehave out there, in here you behave. He's not a prude, he's a zoning board. Without him, the crew would drown in its own appetites. With him, appetites have alcoves and costs. And yet there's a sadness to his stewardship. The Bing is a theater of control that cannot protect its master from the machine's soul rot. He keeps the floors clean, the lighting just so, the back room quiet, and still the larger world intrudes: federal pressure, generational drift, New York's gravity, the crew's slow addiction to the spectacle of itself. Silvio can regulate a room. He cannot regulate the century. Silvio's breakdowns are not random plot turns, they're the body collecting on years of hypervigilance. He has been awake for this entire enterprise, awake to small changes in tone, awake to new resentments, awake to the accountant's warning and the rival's rumor and the family's 1,000 quiet stabbings. Leadership, even second-chair leadership, is the art of never truly sleeping. The interest compounds. It shows in micro-gestures: how he rubs his temple after smoothing a fight, how he exhales as if concluding a chapter after Tony finally leaves the room, how his joking voice can hard switch off like a light when the door closes. You don't need monologues to understand this, you only need to watch the frame. People misread Silvio's stoicism as infinite capacity. It's finite. He knows it's finite. But he also believes that stepping back would invite a worse chaos, so he spends his reserves like a man who assumes he'll always find a way to refinance tomorrow. Eventually, the refinance fails. The nervous system vetoes another crisis. The tragedy is not that he's weak, but that his strength was optimized for a world that demands round-the-clock conversion of disaster into calm. There's no off switch in that job except collapse. Silvio can be merciful. He can also be surgical. What determines which you get is not his mood, it's the institution's balance sheet of risk. If a man can be salvaged without destabilizing the pecking order, Silvio will argue for salvage. If salvaging a man would invite imitation of bad behavior, Silvio will argue for the knife. He frames both as kindness, mercy as kindness to the person, punishment as kindness to the whole. This is why his harshest decisions feel somehow less personal than anyone else. He can be the bearer of terrible news without the petty satisfaction others show. He is not above contempt, but he's good at deleting it from the final draft. The target feels the gravity of the institution, not the sting of Silvio's ego. In a universe built on male pride, that impersonality is almost a grace. Of course, impersonality can become a shield from guilt. If every ugly act is a policy, then no one sins, they only implement. Silvio knows better: the mask is for others. When the room empties, the cost shows up in the eyes again. He files the file, and then for a moment you can see the man who remembers that policies are how people survive what they shouldn't have done. Silvio's look is not vanity, it's a border. The hair, the suits, the posture, these are not merely aesthetic choices. They are a signal that he will keep form even when content turns violent. Men read that signal and adjust. You don't scream in a courtroom, you present. You don't throw a chair at Silvio, you present a case. It's one of the ways he pacifies rooms without raising his voice. He drapes the proceedings in order and dares you to violate the dress code of power. Style helps him with civilians, too. A well-dressed, well-spoken man can ask for terrible things and be granted them because the request arrives as etiquette. He knows how far to lean into it, when to deploy a smirk, when to harden the eyes, when to call a man my friend like a notary public swearing you in. There's theater to it, but more than theater, there's containment. If he can keep his own edges straight, maybe the day will keep its lines. We keep returning to Silvio because he proves something about power that is easy to ignore when you're dazzled by charisma or spooked by raw force. Systems survive on administrators. Empires, corporations, families like this one, they all require a person who will turn impulse into calendar entries and vendettas into minutes of a meeting. That person rarely becomes the protagonist in stories, and that's the point. The absence of spotlight is part of the craft. Silvio also embodies a paradox the show is obsessed with. The more you civilize an immoral enterprise, the more effectively it can do immoral things. He makes the family efficient, predictable, safer for its members, which means it can hurt others more smoothly. He believes he is preventing unnecessary pain by organizing necessary pain. The show never answers whether that's true, it simply shows the cost on his face. And then there's the simple affection the audience feels for a man who rarely lies about what he's doing, even when he's doing it elegantly. Tony self-mythologizes, Paulie self-justifies, Christopher self-medicates, Silvio self-disciplines. The discipline is a quiet honesty. He will not pretend the life is art, he will insist it be tidy. He will not promise justice, he will deliver closure. He will not chase glory, he will chase solvency. In a story where so much is inflated, Silvio is scaled to the problem at hand. That feels L. Silvio's story isn't one of spectacular rise or operatic fall. It's the story of a man who kept fixing the same leak until the house settled on his chest. He is the proof that leadership is not always a question of who shouts but of who edits. And editing, if done well and for long enough, can look like heroism from the outside and feel like erosion from the inside. In the end, if you strip the legend and the suits and the perfect hair, you're left with a craftsman. Not a poet of crime, not a philosopher of violence, just a craftsman of order in a disorderly economy. He believes that if you keep the minutes and honor the clauses and hand out the right number of drinks at the right temperature, men will stay inside the lines. Sometimes that's true, often it's merely delayed chaos. But for years while he was on duty, the lines held more often than they broke. That's not small, that's governance. Silvio Dante is the quiet geometry of power, angles chosen so the room doesn't tip, lines redrawn so the story doesn't break, volumes lowered so the blood in the walls doesn't sound like drums. You can sketch him in a few strokes like a blueprint. The structure looks simple until you try to take one beam out. Then the ceiling reminds you who was holding it up. Christopher Moltisanti is a man trying to be two incompatible things at once, a legend and a survivor. He wants the grand, camera-ready arc, the tragic prince, the heir apparent, the guy whose name enters rooms ahead of him, and at the same time he wants the everyday guarantees of a simpler life, money that shows up, respect that doesn't wobble, love that doesn't demand he change. The gap between those two wants is where he lives and where he bleeds. If Tony is the mind of the family and Silvio is the spine, Christopher is the raw nerve, ambition without insulation, sensitivity without a stable home for it, violence looking for a story that can forgive it afterward. He calls himself a soldier and he is, but he's also a fan of his own myth, and fandom can be an addiction all by itself. Everything about Chris radiates hunger. It's in the way he leans into a room with news he can't hold another second, in the way he recounts instructions already given just to prove he was the one entrusted to repeat them, in the way he flinches at slights even when none were intended. He grew up close enough to the myth of men like Dickie to believe there's a ladder you can climb if you want it badly enough, and far enough from the myth's accounting department to underestimate the interest payments. His core mistake is mistaking momentum for destiny. A good week feels like prophecy. A bad day feels like conspiracy. He metabolizes both with the same drug: more speed, more status, more story, because to sit still would mean hearing his own doubts too clearly. Tony gives him a father, a target, and a trap. As a father figure, Tony offers him what Chris craves, anointing without explanation, the kind of love that sounds like "you're ready, you're my guy, you're next." As a target, Tony becomes the impossible standard, the son everyone warms themselves by and resents. As a trap, Tony is the audience that must be impressed, the mirror Chris checks before every decision. It's not that Tony wants to ruin him. It's that Tony needs him to be useful, and usefulness has a shape that doesn't always match the shape of Christopher's dreams. Each time Chris reaches for symbolic acts, the dramatic score, the decisive hit, the scene that proves he's no longer a kid, Tony retranslates it into logistics. Did the money land on time? Did you keep your mouth shut? Did you keep your people in line? Christopher keeps trying to turn his life into a movie. Tony keeps turning it back into a spreadsheet. Both think they're saving him. Addiction threads through all of this, not as a side plot but as the form his need takes. People talk about his drugs as if they're the reason he fails. That's too simple. The drugs amplify his underlying story hunger, giving him a counterfeit version of the feeling he wants from success, the spike of self-belief, the gloss over old shame, the temporary immunity from comparison and memory. Sobriety doesn't fix the original wound, it just removes the analgesic. And when he does try to quit, he discovers the cruelest truth of recovery: you don't get points for stopping, you get opportunities to prove you've stopped. The world keeps handing him the exact triggers he joined the life to avoid: humiliation, ambiguity, the slow grind of proving yourself to men who are unimpressed by your feelings. He can recite the 12 steps. The step he needs is a 13th one that promises relief from being Christopher Moltisanti in a culture that punishes men for wanting relief. He wants love to be an award, not a negotiation. Adriana exposes that lie simply by loving him honestly. With her, the noise falls away and he's asked to be a person rather than a legend. That should be a blessing. He experiences it as pressure. She wants a life that would require him to stop keeping score in ways the crew taught him to keep score. He balks not because he doesn't love her, he does, but because loving her would mean being small in all the ways he's been told are unforgivable, working for ordinary joys, tolerating boredom, making promises that don't come with theme music. His worst act around her isn't a single decision so much as the long, low cowardice of refusing to choose who he is. He tries to hold two realities at once: the dedicated fiancé who might move on, and the made guy whose future can't include daylight. The life makes the choice for him. Afterwards, he tells himself stories sturdy enough to walk on: necessity, orders, no way out. Those stories are weight-bearing. They also crush him a little more every time he uses them. Violence for Chris is not sport the way it can be for men like Paulie. It's proof. Proof that he belongs, proof that he can flip the switch and stay on the right side of the line his peers draw in their heads between men who do and men who talk. The problem is that proof erases itself. You commit the act and a week later you're back to zero, needing a new credential, a new moment to silence the inner chorus that says you're still the kid eating scraps of respect. That's why his ugliest acts feel compulsive. They're rituals of self-authorization. And because he's creative, yes, creative, he is cursed to imagine himself from the outside while he's doing it. He sees the angle, the lighting, the framing. He knows how it'll play. Then the scene ends and the bill arrives and the audience is gone. It wasn't art, it was a crime with a camera inside his skull. Hollywood is the purest distillation of his confusion. Of course he's drawn to it. Movies offer the grand unifying theory: turn pain into plot, misdeeds into arcs, longing into dialogue that always lands. When he writes and produces, he gets the closest version of control he'll ever experience: final cut over his own legend. But even there he imports the life's pettiness: status, games, paranoia, leverage disguised as friendship. He tries to make his film a weapon and a confession at once, a message to his peers and a hug for the man he wishes Tony could be. The result is a mirror that flatters and accuses, and everybody sees what they fear. The movie succeeds on his terms and fails on the terms that matter. It doesn't heal him. Nothing narrative can. You can't outsource your soul to a screenplay and expect it to return with notes. He's not just insecure, he's exquisitely sensitive, which is different. He feels the room's temperature and adjusts his posture by instinct. He wants to be good at being a man the way a musician wants to be good at playing a standard, honoring the changes, adding a lick of himself, getting a nod from the veterans. Sensitivity is a rarity in his world because it exposes you to the weather. He compensates by preemptive arrogance. Better to sneer first than be sneered at. Better to hurt first than discover you were the one they picked to be hurt. When he's calm, the sensitivity is a gift. He can peacefully read what a situation needs and supply it. When he's rattled, it turns into paranoia and he supplies violence. As a leader, he is at once promising and doomed. He understands the young guys because he is, in spirit, still one of them, curious, combustible, allergic to slow-moving authority. He can inspire loyalty with a single quiet kindness. Then he will lose that same loyalty by pulling rank at exactly the wrong moment, or by chasing a glory play that pays him and exposes them. He wants to be the capo who changes the culture and the capo who inherits the old one intact. He gets halfway to both and then breaks his own momentum. The elders call that immaturity. In a softer universe, it would be called being in process. The life doesn't grant sabbaticals for growth. It offers tests and interprets hesitation as scores against you. Chris is also haunted by class in a way the others will never acknowledge. He knows down to the bone that he is not sophisticated. He can mimic it, he can buy the symbols of it, he can sit at a table and find the knife with 3 tines. But he experiences refinement as an accusation, the white glove rubbed along his soul to show the dust. Rather than admit the hurt, he manufactures contempt for people who appear fluent in languages he's still learning, art guys, Hollywood guys, even certain-made guys whose polish seems inherited. He would rather call them phonies than call himself a student. That reflex keeps him safe and keeps him small. It also makes him easy to wound. One tapped nerve and the entire self he built for the day comes apart. The tragedy of his mentorship with Tony is that both are right about each other in ways that cancel improvement. Chris is right that Tony needs him as both son and scapegoat, heir and lightning rod, and that the older man's love is real but circumscribed by a selfishness that can't be cured by any amount of confession. Tony is right that Chris is not yet a man who can carry the institution without breaking under the weight of his own appetites, and that promoting him too fast would be cruelty disguised as pride. What should be a partnership becomes a closed circuit. Tony withholds until he's provoked to give, Chris behaves until he's provoked to blow up, each claiming proof of the other's defect while recreating it. In kinder stories, the son overtakes the father. In this one, the son keeps accelerating into the father's blind spots until one collision too many proves that speed is not destiny. There are moments where you glimpse the person he might have been outside the life, the gentleness with animals, the sweetness with kids, the way a good song can lift him into actual presence rather than performance. Those aren't lies. They're partial truths intruding on the mask. He is not a monster pretending to be human, he's a human practicing monstrous habits to impress men who cannot tell the difference between courage and compulsion. The pity he deserves is not for what he suffers but for what he refuses, the chance to build a self that doesn't need applause to exist. Near the end, his choices compress. The runway shortens. The future he once described in big adjectives becomes a handful of habits run to their terminal logic. He reaches for shortcuts not because he's lazy, but because he's tired of living in the corridor between his ideal and his reality. He keeps promising the next corner will deliver the view he imagined, financial security as absolution, fatherhood as redemption, a creative triumph as proof there was always an artist under the trigger finger. When that corner keeps feeding him the same hallway, He does what people do when the map is a lie. They panic, they improvise, they confess to the wrong priest. They make a right decision on the wrong day and call it fate. He wants the universe to notice that he tried. The universe wants the envelope delivered and the mess contained. That last car ride, the one where his life's two tracks finally collide, isn't just an ending, it's a verdict on the dream that fueled him. He had always believed the story would save him if he could frame the chaos just right, pick the perfect song, cast himself in the role of the complicated man who did bad things for understandable reasons, then the moral math would even out. The crash smashes the math. For a breath, he becomes a child again, begging the world to make a different choice, to let him keep both the life and the future he named for himself. The answer he gets is the answer the show has always given: you can't keep both. At some point, the ledger collects. And yet it would be cheap to say he failed. On his jagged terms, he succeeds constantly, he earns, he fights, he loves, he tries, he patches himself together and returns. He tells the truth about himself and then lies about it in the same hour. He apologizes and offends, he protects and betrays. He becomes the sum of 1,000 contradictory gestures that, taken together, add up to a man the audience can't stop watching. He's riveting because he's recognizable. Who hasn't wanted applause to fix an ache that applause can't reach? Who hasn't confused motion with change? Who hasn't tried to write a better self into existence and then sabotaged the rewrite at the first sign it might demand a quieter life? Christopher Moltisanti doesn't need chapters because he never managed to live in chapters. He's a run-on sentence with too many commas and not enough periods, rushing to the next clause that might save the paragraph, punctuated by explosions that were supposed to be exclamation points and turned into ellipses instead. He is brave and he is weak, he is cruel and he is tender, he is a connoisseur of grand gestures and an amateur of ordinary decency. And he is, finally, the purest embodiment of the show's thesis: the life sells you a legend that cannot feed you, and by the time you realize you're starving, you've taught yourself to prefer hunger to humility. If you sketch him in 3 lines: ambition, addiction, longing, you get a silhouette that looks like every tragic man you've ever known. Fill it in with the colors of Newark asphalt, club neon, prescription white, and the flicker of a projector in a small room, and the picture turns specific. He's not the heir, he's not the savior, he's not even the cautionary tale the elders used to scare the kids straight. He's the kid who grew into a man while waiting for a signal that never came, and when it finally did, he couldn't tell if it was grace or a warning. He treated it like both. That's Christopher Moltisanti, a man forever arriving, forever almost ready, forever one good scene away from the life he thought he was promised, and forever, tragically, still rehearsing when the curtain falls.